Five.
It is Monday. It's April 3rd, the year of our Lord 2023. It is the Crypto Flight Path. Welcome.
Yeah, pretty uneventful weekend. Bitcoin dipped down. It got into the 27,000s, and let me refresh this CoinGecko here. We might be a little bit under. I think we've popped back over 28,000.
Yes, we saw prices last night that we hadn't seen going all the way back to Friday, March 31st. It was a it was a stressful time late last evening for some of us.
It's 24/7, man. That's just the game we play.
It is.
You
But
know, it,
one
but
Bitcoin still equals one Bitcoin today,
Yeah, to
does it
that
not?
point though, it is interesting. When you enter these markets, it's a completely different mind shift from traditional markets. There's no time off. I mean, things can happen, on a Sunday afternoon or Tuesday morning, or it never stops. But that's kind of what makes it fun.
Yes, the truly global nature of, or the characteristic that I'm describing, this being global, or I'll say it differently, is that the 24/7 uh, or ingredient here combine or being global, it has to be 24/7. I think meaning the traditional finance system and using a bank branch as an example, and this idea of quote unquote normal business hours, and is a concept that we've it's a well worn throughout the last, say, what, 50 years or more, this idea of business hours, or normal business hours, but with the ability for these it's always
There,
shining on one part of the earth.
yeah, yeah, no, and it's the other thing too that I guess with the some of the stress of a 24/7 hour is you have the ability to move your Bitcoin and crypto 24/7 too. So, if you need to pay somebody for goods and services on a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon, you can do it. With traditional banking, you got to wait till the bank opens and business hours and all that fun stuff. So there's pros and cons of it. Today, what we wanted to do is kind of talk about gold a little bit, and we're kind of joking. We say who's buying this stuff. There's a lot of people buying gold, and we wanted to talk about the principles of money, how they relate to gold, and also how they relate to Bitcoin, and why we think Bitcoin is a better version of gold. So, I've got an article that was written by NYDIG, and NYDIG's a great resource for Bitcoin because Bitcoin is, or NYDIG is the I just went blank here. Sorry. NYDIG is Nasdaq, right? Or is that that's not
If
right?
well, hang on, I can help.
Yeah, I this always slips my mind, but my NYDAQ is a huge company that puts out tons of good articles on Bitcoin and the Bitcoin market, and uh, wanted to pull this up because when we talk about money, right? If you can see here, you can see that there's six properties of money. Okay, and while Ted looks up NYDIG, and apologize, we should know this before we start, but it's Monday morning, so cut us some slack. Durability. The first characteristic of money is durability. Second's portability. Third's divisibility. Fourth is fungibility. Fifth is scarcity. Sixth is acceptability. Okay, and so when you talk about anything that has money or is money, right? You want to look at these six characteristics. So, for instance, durability. Durability, produce makes for poor money because it spoils. So, money can't be apples, right? Gold, on the other hand, doesn't rust or otherwise decay. So, that's pretty easy to understand, right? You need something that is going to be durable and not spoil or be worth nothing or go away. Second one is portability. Cash is easy to carry, but gold can be physically taxing to transport in large amounts. It's hard to trade when you have to hire an army just to pay your bills. So here you're talking about, the portability of money, being able to carry it, right? And gold is difficult because if you have a lot of gold, it's difficult to move. All right. The third one is divisibility. US dollars can be broken down into any cents for small purchases. Gold is hard to do that with. You can break it down, but if you have a gold coin or a gold bar, it makes it very difficult to do that with. Fungibility. Number 4, a dollar is a dollar, but one barrel of apples could vary significantly in quality and quantity from another barrel. If a currency isn't fungible, every transaction requires an audit. So this is one that's interesting, right? Because, that's true, right? You can't have, a barrel of apples equal the same amount every time. And in order for something to be in money, it's got to be fungible. So $1 has to equal $1. 1 ounce of gold has to equal 1 ounce of gold. Fifth is scarcity. Currencies aren't exempt from the law of supply and demand. The easier it is to find or create a good, the less value it has. Money needs to have a limited supply to ensure that its purchasing power will remain stable. This is interesting when we talk about cash because they're seemingly able to print infinity of it, right? They think they can, right? Or they're trying to. So that it's not very scarce. Gold, on the other hand, is scarce because there's only X amount of it on the earth. Now, we say that, they're finding more every day, and, with technology, they're going to start mining asteroids, which, 20 years ago would have seemed impossible, but today doesn't seem so crazy. And the sixth is acceptability. If a money fulfills the first 5 criteria, the more likely it is that people will use it. The more people that adopt a currency, the easier it will be to spend. Acceptability can be thought of as a money's network effect. Okay, and so when you talk about money, and let's talk about gold first. And of these 6 properties, I would say, Ted, gold has good durability, good portability in small amounts. Divisibility is tough, but you can still do it. It's got fungibility. It does have scarcity, and it is accepted all over the world. So I would add to this a number 7, which would be, and this isn't necessarily a characteristic of money, but something you have to think about, is your counterparty risk, right? And when you own gold, you can own the physical gold, but in large amounts, a lot of times what people do is they leave it in other people's vaults. So there is a counterparty risk there with leaving money in other people's vaults. But what do you think about gold and its relationship to these 6 characteristics of money?
I think, well, first, and NYDIG is a company, it's a subsidiary of a company called Stone Ridge. So New York Digital Investment Group is a subsidiary of a company called Stone Ridge, which is a holding company, and have around 13 billion or so. They consider themselves an alternative asset manager. So I wanted to get that out of the way real quick.
Yeah, good, because I was way off with NASDAQ.
That's all right. The characteristics of gold, and I'll talk around. I think that the durability thing is, if you've spent any time thinking about gold and maybe harkening back to chemistry class in school and talking about the precious metals versus things like wood, the decay factor here is what I'm referring to. And I think the example that they make around with like produce, or tomatoes, for example, you leave a tomato out for a few days and it's a goner, and it's a terrible substitute or it's a terrible item to be used for currency or money in this case. So the durability thing, I think that's pretty obvious. And if it isn't, you can ask ChatGPT to talk about the durability of gold, perhaps, or do a couple of Google searches. The portability is where it starts to get, in my opinion, the portability factor is kind of, it's something that you need to factor in for some obvious reasons and some not so obvious reasons, mainly around larger quantities. And then what I mean by that simply is if I need to go, if I need to get on my horse and buggy, and I need to travel 8 miles to the to the trading post, and I need to buy some goods for the farm, so to speak. I need to think ahead, and how much gold am I willing to carry with me. And it gets down to what I'm trying to get down to is that traveling with large quantity or any quantity of gold has some risk. I mean, even today in our modern society where people typically behave and don't try to take things that don't belong to them, the real risk in the portability context is that you could be robbed, and there's someone if someone knows you have this kind of gold, and in order to mitigate that, you would have to travel with, say, other individuals that might be armed, that may be willing to protect and otherwise scope out the route ahead and make sure that the trip is without issue. Not trying to make a mountain out of the portability or a mountain out of the molehill here with portability, but it this dovetails or flows right into the next number three, divisibility, and thinking about gold as a brick or gold as coins. There, it's very difficult to break them up into small pieces. But also in the same way, if you take a U.S. dollar, you can't tear it in half and say, "Well, here's 50 cents." You'd have to think about ahead of time the different denominations. Meaning, if you had giant gold, like full size gold bars, gold coins that were denominated in smaller units that you could then use to make purchases with. Uh, those are things you have to consider if you think you want to transact in gold. The fungibility is also kind of an issue because unfortunately, it's part of the human condition, I guess, is that people figure out over time that, and the great kings of our society have figured out that they could take gold coins, melt them down, mix them with other metals, and pass them off as more gold coins. This, which is literally means, which is the literal explanation of debasement. You're
Yeah,
taking your
well, it's
base
like
metal.
it's like J.P. Morgan thought they had like bags of nickel or whatever, and it turns out they were bags of rock.
Yeah. So I mean, even today, in 2023, this uh, this is still happening. But and I guess there's always risk of some kind, even if you're a big mega bank that's too big to fail. And where I think gold is probably really shines, or one way it shines is that it's mostly scarce, and that less so today than say 50 years ago. What I mean by that is there are very sophisticated mining operations that are bolstered by technology and or I should say modern technology and other technological advancement in the process and equipment that is used to literally pull gold from the earth. Still, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort. Uh, it doesn't necessarily cause tremendous price fluctuations, but there's some measurable effect of the additional gold, the supply of gold that comes onto the market every year. And but the last but not least, thinking in terms of acceptability, I'll argue that was it also, if memory serves, J.P. Morgan was quoted as saying is that uh, gold gold is money, everything else is credit. Meaning gold is like true base layer money. And if you don't know what base layer money is, spend some time Googling around and understanding, and perhaps maybe take the track of looking at the 1971 event where Nixon took us off the gold standard, and what happened, or what the world was like before that, where the U.S. dollar was connected or pegged to the value of gold. And the thing I'm trying to get here, or drive toward here with acceptability, is that in our modern society, you and I wouldn't necessarily transact in gold, although we could. It's just it's not something that we're well versed, or we didn't learn about this in school necessarily. And what I mean by that is when, like, for example, when I was in elementary, middle, and high school, we weren't learning about how to enter the workforce and be compensated in gold bars or gold bullion or gold coins or any other precious metal. It was more you're you're, and I'll paraphrase here greatly. We're preparing you in this here public education system so you can enter the workforce and earn U.S. dollars, so you can go participate in the economy and and live. So the it was the thing I'm trying to spit out here is that as a young adult, I still didn't understand or even know that at one point in our society gold was the base layer money, and U.S. dollars were a proxy that we used to exchange goods and services, or pay for things, or value for value, or the underlying word is currency, meaning the paper dollars flowed like water, like a current amongst members of society, and it was used to settle debts. I could exchange paper dollars for goods and services, and the person that was giving me the goods and services was reasonably assured that the paper dollars that I gave them, they could take them back to the bank. They said it's money in the bank. I could take it back to the bank, and if I really wanted to, back in the old days, I could exchange it for an equal amount of gold that I could then I could in modern parlance, I could self custody. I mean, I could hold it myself, put it in my own vault in my own house, or store it, bury it in the woods somewhere, if I wanted to. So those are the things I think about in terms of gold. The last thing I wanted to say in terms of acceptability is that it. I listened to what Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad author, talks about having gold and silver and other metals in it, in case of, end time scenarios or crisis situations. But I think one, as I sit here and think about this, trying to put these thoughts together, I still feel like there's a big void or a big gap in amongst our modern, or the participants or the constituents of modern society, that would be really hard pressed to know where to begin when, uh, if we all of a sudden found ourselves in a situation where we weren't able to use U.S. dollars for any reason, and in order for us to get the things that we needed, we would have to have in our possession some gold or some other precious metal. And
Physical form. I also own Pax Gold, which is a smart contract on Ethereum that I buy, I put in my wallet, and I can exchange that for gold anytime I want. In theory, right? There's counterparty risk, and that's something that I'm okay with at this moment. And the reason I am is because I'll get to the second point. Who's buying gold? Is there's people that are rightly worried about their dollars in the U.S. bank system. Okay, and so when I look at this, I look at it and go, okay, my money in the bank earns me 0.001%. Okay, so I've got a couple options. I could buy treasury bills directly from the government, right? And that's counterparty risk, or I could move a portion of that out and just keep it in gold. So I would give myself a first example of somebody who buys gold, right? And this is something I think is funny. Just because you have Bitcoin doesn't mean you can't own gold too, right? Like there's
that's right.
it's not black or white, right? There's reasons for each. I think the third reason people would buy gold is you have nation states buying gold, right? And they're the biggest purchaser of gold, right? And you've seen this all over the past few years, from China to different nation states, Russia, buying tons and tons of gold, right? They hypothecate it, and they'll get rid of it. Fourth example I would give is somebody who's buying gold is companies. I think Peter Thiel's Palantir has gold on the balance sheet. I think Tesla has gold on the balance sheet, right? I think you're going to start to see companies do this. And so when you get into who's buying it and why would you buy it, it's been a store of wealth for many, many years. There's an argument that the price of gold has been suppressed through paper contracts and derivatives, and the true value of gold is much much higher than $2,000 an ounce. I've listened to gold bugs say that for 20 years, and so we'll see, right? The main thing is that individuals, companies, and nation states are buying gold because of the six of the reasons that we outlined of the values of money, right? And so I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Ted, as far as who's buying gold and thoughts on that before we get into how Bitcoin stacks up versus gold and why we think that Bitcoin is actually better than gold.
There's just a couple of additional things that come to mind when talking about a situation where U.S. dollars are the purchasing power. I don't want to call them worthless; they're not. But the amount of the total amount of goods and services you can acquire for them does change over time, and it typically has gone lower in the system of those things. And one might make the argument that if your time horizon, let's say, is the next 5 years or the next 10 years, let's say that you're concerned today that 10 years from now, the US dollars or the euros or the yen that you've worked for and they're sitting in your bank account, if you're concerned about the purchasing power of those, say, a decade from now, and given that we live in a digitally connected modern society with the ability to transact globally and purchase store value assets digitally now, you might think, well, why don't I take some of those dollars, park them in an asset like gold, specifically Paxos, and you get a lot of interesting there's benefits to that. One being the portability factor that you don't have with physical gold, for example. You do have with Paxos because it's a digital asset that can be put onto a cold wallet or a hot wallet, doesn't matter. But if you needed to move for any reason, you don't have to be concerned about moving your physical gold in any quantity at all because you have the control mechanism that gives you access to your asset 24/7, 365 through your smartphone or PC. But more importantly, you hold the keys to that wallet, the private keys, and you can move those, or you can move with it, and you're unencumbered or restricted in your ability to move around the country or move between countries if it were necessary. So that's the portability facet that I wanted to talk about, or really there's two things there. One is the ability to stave off the effects of currency debasement simply by virtue of the fact that to service the things that are happening that are way beyond our control as individuals, talking about central banking entities and the things that the pressures that they're under to behave and act in certain ways, and all of the macroeconomic levers, the trade between nations, and the effects it has on what the money can buy, and so on. And anyway, that was all I had to add there.
Yeah, and I think that
Move
the
on.
thing you got to remember with this type of investment is you're taking counterparty risk in the company Paxos, right? Do they have the gold they say they do? And they've got measures to kind of alleviate some of those worries. But again, you're taking counterparty risk, but it does help with the portability aspect. And the way I look at it too is if you do get price appreciation in gold, it's much easier for me to go to the market with a Paxos token and realize that price appreciation than it may be with physical gold. So just a couple things to think about there, and let's take that and use it to parlay into how Bitcoin stacks up versus the 6 characteristics of money we just talked about. And so we'll go through this real quick. Durability, which is Bitcoin cannot be destroyed. So long as the blockchain is maintained on a single computer, Bitcoin exists. Since its inception, the network's uptime has been 99.99%. It has gone more than 3,200 days without an outage. For a point of comparison, the Federal Reserve's money transfer system went offline for several hours in February 2021. All right, so portability. Bitcoin can be set anywhere in the world where there's an internet connection. A Bitcoin user who has memorized their private keys literally carries their Bitcoin with them wherever they go. Divisibility. A single Bitcoin consists of 100 million smaller units known as Satoshi. Fungibility. Bitcoins are all the same. No coin is any more valuable than the next one. Unlike with gold or paper currency, counterfeiting is impossible. And I want to, before I forget, there's another characteristic we need to talk about, and that's confiscatability. So Ted, note that, and we'll talk about that in Bitcoin. Scarcity. Bitcoin is the first provably scarce object. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. Anyone can check the protocol's code to confirm this limit. A vast majority of nodes, the enforcer of Bitcoin's rules, would have to act against their own economic self-interest for the limit to be altered. And finally, acceptability. While estimates for the number of Bitcoin holders vary, some peg adoption as high as 114 million people. This number grows each day as the knowledge of the protocol spreads and becomes easier to buy, spend, and store. So, when you look at Bitcoin in comparison to gold, not only does it meet the 6 characteristics of money, it also is not confiscatable, unlike gold, which at times the U.S. government has came and said it was illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold, and demanded that citizens return gold or sold gold back, or whatever they did. And if you've got a bunch of gold, in theory, it's possible for the government to come in and take it from you, right? Now, I don't know practically how that played out. I would imagine most people didn't sell their gold back when the government said, it was illegal. But I think it's another characteristic of Bitcoin that Bitcoin has that gold doesn't, is that it's much harder to seize someone's Bitcoin because they won't know the private key. And the only way they can get it from you, and they can get it from you, right? They can hold a gun to your head and they can say, give me your private key or I will shoot you, right? And so in that scenario, yeah, but are they going to do that to 50 million US citizens, right? Okay, but that's something I wanted to bring up just because I think it's important. And so when you look at, let's just go through it real quick and we can comment on each one. Durability. You can't, Bitcoin, it lives in a distributed ledger, right? You can't destroy Bitcoin so long as the network's up and running, and the network will be up and running as long as there's one node anywhere in the world with a copy of the blockchain history. You have thoughts on durability in Bitcoin, Ted?
Yeah, I think it's safe at this point to make the comparison that if in the event of some sort of like nuclear conflict, that the cockroach would survive, exists, and its adaptability, which flows right into how durable it is as a species and as a creature. I would, that's a really extreme example, but the point I'm driving toward here with the durability factor is that what I think the simplest way to think about the durability factor is simply that if you would have to extinguish the internet globally, and I think that's a tall order, and you would have to get everyone around the world that operates the mechanism called the internet, all of the different all the different underlying functions and capabilities and infrastructure that constitute the global internet. You'd have to get them all to agree to turn off, to stop. And part of the internet's design is that it's the intention was that the internet would be able to function in the face of calamity and the face of major events that would take parts of it offline. The internet is resilient enough, and I guess what I'm trying to say there is there's an element of resilience in the Bitcoin network that lives on top of the internet. And at this point, with the adoption and proliferation of the internet globally, it's statistically very, very, very unlikely that we would have a situation in the future. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I hope that this never happens. But the point I'm trying to get to is simply that Bitcoin is durable in ways that we probably don't fully understand, and that is a good thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too when you talk about, talking to people about all Bitcoin all the time, and a lot of times they say, "Well, what if the internet goes down?" Well, I always say, "Well, it'll probably come back on, right?" Like you can't, people have this idea in their head like, "Oh my God, the internet goes out, Bitcoin's gone." That's not true at all. If the internet goes out for a prolonged period of time, Bitcoin will survive. Now, the issue is if that happens, and this is why I don't think it'll happen, government can't function, banks can't function, businesses can't function. There's if that you come to that moment, you've got a lot bigger problems. Now, that being said, I would argue that, like we talked about earlier, own both, right? If your concern with Bitcoin is that the internet's going to go out for a prolonged period of time, you want to have some gold and silver, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that seems like a logical solution to that, right? And I don't think the internet will go out for a prolonged period of time. Just because I think there's redundancies built in. I think you've got Elon Musk and Starlink. I think it would be very hard, like you said, for all these countries to agree that, hey, we're going to keep our internet off for, you know, 3 months, right? I just don't think you're going to have that happen. So I think that's a good segue to the next point of portability. And Bitcoin clearly wins in this scenario because Bitcoin can be sent anywhere in the world in a matter of minutes, right? It doesn't matter where you are. You could be in Germany, Ted, and I could be in Africa, and I could send you Bitcoin the same way I could send it from, New York to San Francisco or across the room. I don't have to mail it. I don't have to store it. All I have to do is send you some Bitcoin, open up the app, and send you Bitcoin. Gold is a different deal. To for portability in gold, to send it, you've got to put it on a plane. You've got to pay somebody to insure it. You've got to make sure nobody steals it. You've got to, and this goes to carrying it too. If I want to go down to Costa Rica and carry my, net worth with me in Bitcoin, it's pretty easy to do, right? But if I've got, $5 million in gold, I can't get that to Costa Rica. And for whatever reason I would want to, right? It doesn't have to be like a catastrophic thing. It could just be that I want to do it, right? Like, that I don't need
Hmm.
some, and that's something else too. That's like with Bitcoin, you get the so much more flexibility, and I just think it's a superior asset in regards of portability specifically.
Yeah, the portability is pretty amazing, and there's it like what I'm trying to drive toward here is that if in this context right now, in the immediacy of this moment, we are thousands of miles apart, literally having this conversation over the internet, and information is being transmitted very, very quickly between our two respective locations. And so let that be the foundation for what I'm about to explain next is that if you were so inclined, you could open your Bitcoin wallet in an app form on your smartphone, and you could tap the receive button, and it would generate a receive address on the screen, and it would probably show a QR code. Okay, that's a pretty standard thing now. You could hold that up to the camera like this, and if I were so inclined, I could take my Bitcoin app and I could open it up and tap the send button, and it would open the camera, and I could hold my camera up to the screen and scan your Bitcoin receive address, and then I could initiate a transfer of Bitcoin from my wallet to your wallet. And the magic things that I think should be, or the things that should be, the gears that should be turning in people's heads when they think about this is that money can travel just as fast and over the same networks as information does today on the internet. And so, in that moment, when I scan your receive address and then I authorize a transaction, I'm going to ask the Bitcoin network, I'm going to ask my app to generate a new transaction, put it onto the mempool for processing, and then in about 10 minutes or so, this will be etched into the blockchain, and the Bitcoin that was formerly in my wallet will be moved from my wallet address over to your address. And we didn't have to be in the same place. We didn't have to travel with gold several thousand miles, and we didn't have to take any of that risk. And it happened instantly. And I say instantly, I mean once the transaction gets written into the blockchain, it is done, and that happens really, relatively speaking, very quickly, and more importantly, for very little cost. And to make it one last way to drive this point home, if I wanted to send you a wire, or even worse, if I wanted to write you a check, I could do that. I could write it out. I could get in my car, drive to the post office, buy a stamp, and drop it in the box, and it would take 5 to 7 business days to get there. And then you could walk it to the bank or drive it to the bank and deposit it and wait for it to clear. But more importantly, if I wanted to send you a wire, I would have to either get on the phone with my bank, or I'd have to go to the branch and initiate this process, pay $26 if you're here in the US to do a domestic wire, and then you would wait a couple hours and money might land in your account the same day. It may take a few extra days, who knows. But the point is that the thing that I'm really trying to drive home here is that you don't have to be in the same place as someone that you want to send, you want to transact with. You can do it like I just described. If you already know if they could send you an email and say, this is my receive address, and you could send Bitcoin to that receive address from anywhere in the world, at any time of the day or night, without any problems or restrictions, and it takes minutes in comparison. And I think that that's a really powerful concept that the rest of the world is slowly waking up to.
I agree. I agree. And then let's move on to divisibility. I thought those were great points, right? That's important for everybody to understand that when it comes to portability, I mean, I think gold or Bitcoin clearly, surpasses gold. And then as far as divisibility goes, I think Bitcoin is superior in divisibility too. And this is something people struggle with because, they think that they have to buy a whole Bitcoin. That's not true. Each Bitcoin consists of smaller units known as Satoshis, and there's 100 million of them per Bitcoin. So you don't have to buy a full Bitcoin, right, to participate in the Bitcoin monetary network. You can take, your $100 and buy the equivalent of $100 worth of Bitcoin in Satoshis, right? And that is a percentage of the 100 million per Bitcoin, right? And so that I think is really powerful to get across that, when you have gold, you can divide gold down into, $100 little chips of it, right? But, if I want to divide it even further to make a transaction, you'd have to cut it in half, and you'd have to measure it, and you'd have to, get somebody to accept that. And I think Bitcoin is just far, far superior in divisibility, in the fact that I can send anyone any denomination of US dollars in Bitcoin, right? I could send them $1, I could send them $100, I could send them $5 million, I could send them $30 million, right? It's all the same. And again, you can do that at the speed of information, and I think this one, even though once you understand it, it's very, very easy to understand. Getting over that hump of understanding that each Bitcoin is divided into 100 million Satoshis is somewhat challenging for people when they first start out with this.
Yeah, I have to admit that when I first was learning about Bitcoin and was looking at the price, and it was in the $6,000 range at that time, and I couldn't. I'll make the example as in the environment that I was in at this family office money management firm. We would look at stocks, and the idea of buying fractional shares or fractions of shares, for example, was we just, it was not something we talked about. I didn't even know this was a thing until very later on in life, so to speak. You can purchase fractions of a share today, but the point I'm trying to get to is that we would look at stocks, and we would make a decision about how many individual whole units we would buy or trade, I should say. And we used to laugh that Berkshire Hathaway, for example, has different classes of shares. You can buy the top tier, I guess, Berkshire BRK A Class A shares for hundreds of thousands of dollars per share. And if you don't if in like take the fractional share ownership thing out of the equation, you look at that and you think, if BRKA or Berkshire's Class A stock is $400,000 a share, that's like buying a house, one unit. And you think, there's no way. There's no way. Because I guess I'm trying to, like, another way to make the example is that there's a car that I want to buy. I can't buy a fraction of the car and say, well, I want $50,000 worth of that $100,000 car. That doesn't work. You can't buy uh, if you want to buy a gallon of milk, but a gallon of milk is too expensive, you have to say, oh, I'm only going to purchase the half gallon size, but it's a different unit. You can't take the one and split it in half and only, if you're old enough to remember Living Color, there was the guy asking how much for just one rib. They're not going to sell you just one rib. Buy a rack of ribs. That's a whole unit. So this idea of fractional share ownership is a good, it's a good like starter. It's a good gateway to understanding the fractional ownership nature, or the fractions, or the individual units that exist per whole Bitcoin. And the way you explained it, it's still today in 2023, it is very challenging for some folks to understand that you don't have to think about entire unit ownership like shares. What you can think of is that you can purchase US dollar, or whatever fiat money you want to use to purchase a fraction of a Bitcoin. You start thinking, once you get your mind around this idea of denominating in your local fiat money, or currency, I should say, and then you think about how many satoshis you get in place of, or during that purchase process, that is a big step forward in getting helping people understand the divisibility aspect of Bitcoin.
And that's why that's why we say Bitcoin is for everybody, because you could use it as a multi-billion-dollar company. You could buy, $500 million worth to put on your balance sheet, or as an individual with $5,000 in your checking account, you can buy $50 worth a week. It works for everybody, and the reason it does is because it's got the factor of divisibility. And so I think that's really important for people to try to understand, like we talked about, just when you start to get into this, if you can get your mind around each Bitcoin is made up of 100 million smaller units called Satoshis, and you don't have to buy a full Bitcoin to participate in the monetary network, that is a huge, huge step in your journey to understanding this. And so we'll parlay that into the next point of fungibility. And this one, I think, is the word. When you first learn about fungibility, you're like, what does that mean? And it's a strange word to describe what it talks about. But basically, all Bitcoins are the same. There's Bitcoin. No Bitcoin is worth any more than any other Bitcoin. That's why we say one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, right? There's no differences in any of the Bitcoin that are in the monetary network. Ted, I really don't have anything else to add to that because it's pretty self-explanatory.
Well, I think one thing I'll add is to think about it like this: if in the old days, if you were willing to accept silver coins, for example, for goods and services that you were putting into the market, let's say we're back in the 1800s, or even better, 1500s, when this idea of monetary, like metals debasement, people getting crafty. What you didn't know when you were accepting coins for services or goods, and back in the old days, is whether or not the person that was giving you those coins had gotten or had taken more pure versions. I mean, think about it this way: I'm not a metals expert. Somebody hands me a silver coin. If it looks like a silver coin, I have to trust that it is 100% silver, for example. But what I don't know is, I don't know if they took nickel and silver and melted them both down and put them together in coins and made twice as many and are passing them off as originals, or I should say fully based metals, meaning it's the opposite of a metal that's been melted down and mixed with other metal to literally debase the amount of actual silver in each coin. Those are real risks, and this is why many types of money have failed in the past over the last 6,000 years, is because eventually the money is literally worthless, because it doesn't contain the thing that made it valuable. That's what the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that one Bitcoin has 100 million satoshis. The next one, the one next to it, so to speak, is of the same caliber and quality and divisibility and fungibility, and has all the same characteristics down to the last satoshi that constitutes it. And the most important concept to remember is that the Bitcoin network is what enforces this, the security and all of the things that make up the Bitcoin network all of the protections that are in place that make sure that transactions that are presented to the network meet certain standards before they're allowed to be processed. The the solving of the double spend problem. Uh, these are elements or these are fundamental ingredients in the way the Bitcoin network is architected and it functions. Is that when you spend Bitcoin from your wallet, it lands in some other wallet, and that happens once, and it's digitally verifiable anywhere on the network, any node, any person, anytime, anywhere can verify a transaction as being legitimate and know that the Bitcoin that landed, the Satoshis that landed in your wallet are different and unique insofar as they can't be copied, but they can be swapped. So I could send you some Bitcoin, somebody could send me some Bitcoin, and they are interchangeable because they have the exact same characteristics, and by interchanging them, there's no debasement that occurs.
No,
Is the
that's
point I wanted to get.
fantastic. No, that's great. That was much more detailed explanation than I had. So thank you for that. That's very helpful in understanding fungibility as it relates to Bitcoin. And so the fifth characteristic of money is scarcity. And this one, I think Bitcoin wins hands down, right? So it's the first provably scarce asset. We know for a fact there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever to come into existence, right? And with gold, you can have an idea of the amount of gold that exists, but like, we talked about all the time, they just found $3 trillion worth in China, and pretty soon they're going to be able to send rockets to space and pull it off asteroids, right? Like, we don't know how much gold there is in the world, right? And so that idea of scarcity, even though gold is scarce, right? Because it's hard to get out of the ground, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to, manufacture. Bitcoin wins far and away because you can mathematically prove the amount of Bitcoin that will ever come into existence. So we know there will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever to exist, right?
Yeah, there's not much I would add other than to say that you have to place a lot of trust in the entities like governments when they tell you how much gold they have, or even worse, or perhaps less worse, depending on your perspective, gold mining operations that claim to, and as much as, this is not a knock on Paxos, but the reality is that they're acting in an environment where there have been plenty of other bad actors, and we have to, or I think one of the benefits of Paxos is that there is a there's a blockchain component that we can use to verify that Paxos exists in someone's wallet, and there's a way to understand, to a certain extent, the supply of that token and how it measures up to the, hopefully we believe, the supply numbers of physical gold. But still, you don't have to wonder with the Bitcoin network is that it's mathematically woven into the fabric and the DNA of this entire system, and every participant on the network, whether it's a mining node or it's a miner or a validator, or if you're just running a straight Bitcoin node of your own, that you have your own copy of the entire blockchain, and you can verify any transaction from any point in time on any node that participates in the network. They all follow the same rules, and it's because and really the last point was simply that unless you're able to change the laws of physics and you're able to rewrite the mathematical constructs that make up the way numbers operate in the galactic sense, in the universal sense, I mean, like across space and time, then and only then could you maybe change the rules. But I mean, we're talking about something that's virtually impossible for human beings to do,
Yeah, and I think
meaning
again,
change the rules.
yeah, it changed the rules of Bitcoin, right? Like, change the rules of,
Right.
yeah. And so when we were talking about Paxos too, I want to bring up again with Bitcoin, one of the things that it has that's superior is that it's the only asset you can own that's provably scarce, that you have no counterparty risk, right? Now you can do that with physical gold and silver, right? But then you have the issues of being able to transfer it, and portability and those kinds of things, and making sure that it's fungible, that the gold you buy is actually gold, right? And there's a story about the Roman Empire when they were spreading their army all over the world, and it's funny because it's scary. because that's how the Roman Empire fell. They tried to spread their army over the world while at the same time debasing their money, right? So they would melt down, their silver coin and debase it with other metals, and eventually they couldn't pay their soldiers because their money wasn't worth anything, and nobody fights for free, And so that's an interesting point and to make in relation to what's happening to us today and what we're doing with our money. But I digress for a second there. Let's move on to the acceptability of Bitcoin, and this is something that where I would say gold wins right now, because people still to this day understand gold. They accept it. Now, I've never seen a transaction made in gold in my entire life. Now that's coming from somebody who doesn't live in that world, right? I have seen hundreds of transactions done in Bitcoin, right? And so, I can say that from a personal perspective, like the acceptability of Bitcoin in my world is growing rapidly, but I would argue that gold probably is more acceptable. I'm thinking in my head, like, trying to think out loud. I've never seen anybody exchange gold for anything. But
Neither have I.
that being said, though, I think from a societal perspective, the majority of people would accept gold, right, today over Bitcoin. What are your thoughts there? But I do think Bitcoin is growing very, very fast, right? And so I don't know the answer to this on acceptability. I would take Bitcoin over gold any day.
Yeah, yeah, I would. Yeah, I think the harkening back to some of the points we've articulated prior is simply that if somebody gave me, let's say, $1,000 worth of gold in gold coins, I wouldn't. I would. I wouldn't want to walk. I would, in the same way that if I had $1,000 in cash, I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't want anyone to know that I had that if I was going to go to the grocery store or something to that effect. I'm not trying to sound like a jerk here, but I mean, stranger things have happened, and you spend 5 minutes reading. I mean, do this at your own risk. What I'm about to say next. You can read the news, the mainstream news about people who get robbed. They like Los Angeles, California, guy wearing a Rolex gets mugged because some people look at that and they think, oh, this guy's got plenty of money. He doesn't need that watch. I want to take it. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to go pawn it because I don't have anything. And whatever. I'm just saying that if someone gave me a bunch of gold coins, I would I would probably sweat a little bit all of a sudden because I would become hyper aware. And I'm actually referencing a situation. Now, we both just said that we'd never seen anybody transact or use gold to buy anything. Um, I'll walk back just a hair, a situation that I was able to witness firsthand, where in broad strokes, someone wanted to make a down payment on a piece of real estate, a seven-figure piece of real estate, and they used a substantial amount of gold coins that were valued in the north of $250,000 US. That need this was a whole process of going to a bank, presenting them, hiring someone to come and validate this harkens back to earlier. Like if someone's paying me in gold or silver, for example, how do I know that those are not fakes? You just don't.
You have to
Uh,
test it.
that's right. And we went through this whole process, and let me tell you, that was the once the principal took possession of these as collateral for a down payment, that was one of the sweatiest car rides back to home base I can remember, because it's funny, on the way over there I didn't give it a second thought of what we were doing or what we were about to do, but it wasn't a transaction that was settled. It was more of, this is collateral. And it was all of a sudden I started thinking about, like, well, what if someone knows now that we have this in our possession? And it was uncomfortable, to say the least. Anyway, the thing I'm trying to get back on point here with acceptability. We are talking about acceptability, or are
Well,
we
yeah,
talking about
but
scarcity?
also to your story, like, how's the bank know that's even your gold?
Excellent question. We had to make a call to someone that had Now we had to trust this person that said they had the credentials and the tools to be able to validate the or be able to verify the authenticity of these particular coins. And it took probably an hour for them to go through the whole set. And it was, do you want to talk about counterparty risk? We were trying to do our best to minimize the counterparty risk, but we actually just shifted it from the person that was presenting the collateral over to the person who was validating the authenticity of the collateral. So it's a huge amount of trust. And
That's
that
interesting though.
trend,
Well,
yeah,
I just to like I think this is where Bitcoin ultimately wins, because my thesis on Bitcoin is it will be collateral that I use to buy income producing assets, right? Because in this instance, your bank gold run, or your you got to carry all that gold, and it's so much simpler for me to verify that, let's say Bitcoin's worth $100,000 and I have 5 Bitcoin, okay, and all I have to do, I can verify that instantly, right? Like I don't have to worry about counterparty risk, right? This is where I think this is all going, and I think Bitcoin in the end is superior to gold in that aspect as collateral, and as our boy Michael Saylor always liked to say, it's the world's most pristine collateral. And I think over time, when we're talking about acceptability, people will accept Bitcoin as just that, the world's most pristine collateral.
yeah, I agree. The if take that example where this person wanted to buy this piece of real estate that was up for sale, and they wanted to make a down payment. Uh, what could have happened is we could have gotten an escrow, someone to act as an escrow agent, for example, that would have had a Bitcoin address that the person could have sent Bitcoin to. We could have verified with 100% certainty that the Bitcoin landed in this escrow account, so to speak. There could have been contractual rules around what happens, who manages the private keys of that account. It was the escrow agent and not the selling entity, and that the buying entity, between the two and the escrow agent, there was 100% verifiability, if that's even a word, that the escrow agent was holding the collateral, and we could verify that it existed and that it was 100% Bitcoin, for example, meaning 100% authentic Bitcoin. And then the seller in this case could have acted then with great confidence, knowing that the collateral is in place. It could have proceeded throughout the next stages of the transaction. And then if at any point, for example, and now get this, the buyer in this real life example where someone put gold up as a deposit, uh, to hold the hold this house from being sold to someone else, they ended up backing out. And with this whole process of delivering the gold back to the person, I mean, golly, and think about the risk in that. Is that what if the person that walked in to collect it was wearing a really elaborate, and I'm being an idiot here for a second, but imagine if they were wearing some really elaborate disguise that, and we had to trust that when we gave it back to them that it was actually the person. I'm just saying, like, this kind of thing, this situation would have been much easier, much less sweat, and much less worry and anxiety if we had been able to do this on the blockchain with Bitcoin,
I,
at the
I
end of
agree.
the story.
I agree. And I think something that's going to happen too is that the first thing that comes with acceptability is every nation state that exists will issue their own currency, right? This idea that, you know, Bitcoin is going to become the world reserve currency in a world where nation state powers exist. I just don't know that happens like people think it will. But what I do think happens is Bitcoin becomes, in a world where you have nation states that issue their own currency, I think Bitcoin becomes recognized and accepted as the method of international trade between company or countries. Just for the same reason we were talking about, and companies, and just for the same reason we were talking about with the example with the house, right? This is so much easier to verify and know than having to take, U.S. dollar risk or Chinese yuan risk between different countries. If I'm, Brazil and China, they say they want to settle in Chinese yuan. Well, you know, they're going to get to a point where these people don't trust each other. Like I always laugh. I talk about this with my buddies. I'm sure we've talked about it on here. You put, a Chinese guy, a Russian guy, a Canadian guy, whatever, and a U.S. guy in a room. They make a deal. All four of them, when they walk out, are going to figure out how to screw each other. That's just how it is, right? And that's not a comment on any one of their, nationalities. That's just life, right? And so this is where Bitcoin wins in the end because you don't have to worry about any of that, right? We know for mathematical certainty what Bitcoin is. So if I want to buy $100 million worth of oil, right, I can buy it in Bitcoin. And I think that's what will happen relatively quickly because you've got all these countries trying to start, alliances and all this stuff. Well, great, whatever, US can't stop it. But I think trade will be settled in Bitcoin first internationally. And then I think over time, you start to see countries realize that this is extremely valuable, and then you get nation states acquiring it. That's a whole other topic. But as far as acceptability goes, I think that's kind of what happens. But I also think it starts with the individual, like we say all the time, one Bitcoin wallet at a time, right? So I think that was a great overview of the characteristics of money and gold, and then how Bitcoin compares to each of them. I think Bitcoin is superior as far as that goes, and then also because it's harder to confiscate, and you also have no counterparty risk. So I would add 7 and 8 to how Bitcoin stacks up versus gold, and I think those are very important characteristics of any money to have. Any final thoughts from you, Ted?
Yeah, as far as the confiscatability, uh, the Gold Act of I think it was 1934. Was it Eisenhower? Maybe. Um, don't don't trust, verify.
We've
The,
got we've got Google. I can look it up for us. Go ahead though. Keep
yeah,
talking.
I just had it and I closed that tab like a ding dong. So the thing I wanted to say is that the government in the 30s in the previous century,
33.
yeah, they issued a directive and went about confiscating individuals' gold, and all it took was a stroke of the pen. And that's another type of risk. Uh, Bitcoin mitigates this risk because your Bitcoin lives on the network. It lives in the open ledger. The open ledger, you can't turn it off. What are the information that you possess in your mind and in your backup, so to speak, like your hard metal backup of your seed phrase, can be taken with you. And that is a powerful concept because your Bitcoin's not, no one's going to take it from your address on the ledger unless you authorize that transaction or sign that transaction with your Bitcoin wallet to your, meaning the spend function. And that's really, really powerful. And I think that this leads the confiscatability, or the fact that it's really difficult to confiscate Bitcoin. You can confiscate the person easier than you can confiscate the seed phrase. And where this goes is that this idea of collateral, I wanted to add a couple of other interesting thoughts that I have around this, is that the both Saylor and Raoul Pal talked extensively about the quote unquote pristine collateral. And this harkens back to the idea that money is easily debased and it buys less over time. So if you were using it for collateral, and I'm talking about US dollars or some other fiat money or even metals as collateral, there's the supply issue still affects the value of your collateral moving forward through time. And so the point I'm trying to get to here is that Bitcoin in its purest form doesn't change, and the supply can't be messed with. It can't be augmented. You can't add supply to the Bitcoin network. Someone may issue derivatives of a product, but that's a whole nother can of worms. And the point I'm trying to get to simply is that when in tomorrow, starting today, or from today forward, every day into the future, Bitcoin's ability to act as ultra sound, solid, stable, verifiable, scarce, verifiably scarce collateral is a very powerful concept that I think the world doesn't understand today.
No, I think that's a great point. And, to kind of wrap this up, I think when you look at both of these assets, what I do personally is I own both of them for different reasons, right? And, Ted, I don't know what your position is on that. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. I think you can decide for yourself based off your own situation and your own understanding of each. So I don't want people to kind of like think, oh, you have to do one or the other. Well, no, it's not true, right? The reality of the situation is you should consider yourself extremely blessed if you can, afford any of it, right? Like that's something we always forget about, especially in, the Bitcoin and crypto world is that like, look, we live in a little bubble, there's, our little world is still small compared to how most people live their day-to-day lives, right? And so what you've got going on right now is we're hyper aware of potential problems in the banking system and with the US dollar. Most people aren't aware of this stuff at all, right? And so if you take the time to understand Bitcoin and take the time to kind of future proof your wealth by owning both Bitcoin and gold, and you have the ability to do so, consider yourself extremely lucky because most people, one, don't have the ability to do so. They're just trying to survive, okay? And so, two, it's one of those things where, you know, if you do your research and if you see this coming down the pike, you're going to be kicking yourself if you don't take some action to at least protect a portion of your wealth that you keep in US dollars. Okay, so that's the main point I wanted to get across. And when you talk about Bitcoin and gold and the characteristics of each, I think they both do a good job. I think Bitcoin is superior, and I think you'll see that play out over time. And that's kind of where I wanted to leave it. Ted, do you have any other things to add?
Nope. I'll say that's a great way to sum it up. And you you don't have to own just one.
Yep.
You can
Nope.
do
That's
you can own what you like.
yep.
That's all I have.
Perfect. All right. Well, end with a disclaimer. Everything we talk about isn't financial device or device advice. Do your own research. Everybody's in a unique situation. Do what's best for you at the end of the day. Don't listen to Ted and I. We are here for entertainment and education, but do your own research. So, you guys are smart. You know what to do.